Admiral Vexthul stood at the massive viewing window of his flagship, watching the small blue planet slowly rotate in the darkness of space. His ship was enormous, big enough to house 1 million beings, and it cast a shadow across Earth's surface, like a dark cloud. Behind him, dozens of smaller warships waited in perfect formation, their weapons charged and ready. This was supposed to be easy. Every planet the hegemony had conquered in the past 1,000 years had followed the same pattern. Show up with overwhelming force, make demands, watch the locals panic and surrender within hours. Then install a puppet government and move on to the next world. Earth should have been just another routine conquest. The Admiral's scaled fingers tapped against the metal railing as he reviewed the intelligence reports. Humans were barely out of their planetary cradle, still squabbling among themselves over resources and territory. Their most advanced weapons were crude missiles and primitive energy weapons. They didn't even have faster-than-light travel yet. This should have been over before it started. Deep beneath Seoul, President Hyun-woo sat in a reinforced bunker that had been built during the old Cold Wars of the previous century. The room hummed with activity as technicians worked at computer terminals, translating the alien message that had been broadcast to every government on Earth simultaneously. The translation software had taken 3 hours to decode the basic meaning, but the message was crystal clear in its simplicity. Defense Minister Ji Hai leaned forward in her chair, her face pale but determined. She had spent her entire career preparing for conflicts between nations, never imagining she would one day be planning humanity's response to an alien invasion. Across the table, Admiral Min-ho studied satellite images of the massive ships hanging in Earth's orbit like metal. Vultures, General Sung-jin broke the tense silence. The message is real. We've confirmed it came from the lead ship. They want complete and total surrender of all human governments within 72 hours, or they begin what they call planetary pacification procedures. The president rubbed, his temples feeling the weight of 8 billion lives pressing down on his shoulders. Outside the bunker, people around the world were looking to their leaders for answers, for some sign that everything would be okay. But how could anyone prepare for something like this? What are our options? Ji Hai asked, though everyone in the room already knew the answer. Humanity's combined military forces wouldn't last 5 minutes against even one of those alien ships. Admiral Min-ho pulled up tactical displays showing Earth's defensive capabilities. We have nuclear weapons, but their ships are positioned too far out for most of our missiles to reach them. Even if we could hit them, we don't know if conventional weapons would even scratch their hulls. The room fell quiet as everyone absorbed the reality of their situation. They were hopelessly outgunned and outmatched. Logic said they should surrender and hope for mercy. But something deeper, something fundamentally human rebelled against the idea of simply giving up without a fight. President Hyun-woo straightened in his chair and looked around the table at his advisors. What's our response? The question hung in the air for a long moment before Admiral Min-ho spoke, his voice steady despite the impossible odds. We tell them no. We politely decline their generous offer and suggest they leave our system for they still can. The absurdity of the situation almost made Ji Hai laugh. Here they were facing extinction, and they were talking about being polite to their would-be conquerors. But somehow that very human response felt exactly right. When humanity's refusal was transmitted back to the alien fleet, Admiral Vexthul couldn't believe what he was hearing. His translator must have made an error. No primitive species had ever refused the hegemony's demands. It simply didn't happen. He ordered the message retranslated 3 times before accepting that these humans had actually told him no. The audacity was almost admirable, if it wasn't so stupid. He would have to demonstrate why the hegemony's demands were not suggestions. The destruction of Luna's smallest satellite was meant to be a gentle reminder of the aliens' power. The focused energy beam took less than 3 seconds to completely vaporize the rocky moon, leaving nothing but glowing particles drifting in space. Surely now the humans would understand their situation, but instead of panic and immediate surrender, something unexpected happened. Within hours of the demonstration, every major city on Earth began massive evacuation procedures. Traffic jams stretched for hundreds of miles as millions of people fled urban areas. But this wasn't the chaotic panic the Admiral had expected to see. Dr. Jamin worked without sleep for 18 straight hours, leading teams of scientists and engineers in analyzing every scrap of data they could gather about the alien ships. The destruction of the satellite had been terrifying, but it had also been incredibly valuable. For the first time, they had seen the aliens' weapons in action. The energy signatures were unlike anything in human technology, but they followed recognizable patterns. The ship designs were efficient but predictable. Most importantly, the aliens had made a crucial mistake. They had underestimated humanity's ability to learn and adapt. "They're powerful," Jamin reported to the Emergency Council, his eyes red from exhaustion but bright with determination. "But their technology follows predictable patterns, and they made a mistake. They let us watch them work." 3 months had passed since the first alien ships appeared over Earth. Commander Kixmol expected to arrive at a broken world, ready to accept hegemony rule without further resistance. Instead, his massive invasion fleet dropped out of hyperspace into what could only be described as a nightmare. The tactical display in front of him lit up like a Christmas tree, red warning symbols appearing faster than his computers could count them. Thousands upon thousands of objects floated in Earth's orbital space, each one flagged as a potential threat. His bridge crew scrambled at their stations, trying to make sense of what they were seeing. "Sir, we're detecting massive electromagnetic signatures throughout the system," his sensor officer reported, voice shaking slightly. "There are objects moving on intercept courses from every direction." Kixmol had conquered 47 worlds for the hegemony. He had seen desperate last stands, clever traps, and suicidal attacks. But he had never seen anything like this. The humans had turned their entire solar system into a weapon. What had once been simple cargo ships now bristled with makeshift missile launchers. Civilian vessels had been gutted and rebuilt as floating bombs, their cargo holds packed with explosives and guided by simple computer systems. Between the larger asteroids, nearly invisible cables stretched like spider webs, designed to tangle and disable any ship unlucky enough to fly into them. Most disturbing of all were the kinetic kill vehicles. Chunks of metal and rock, some no bigger than refrigerators, others the size of city blocks, all moving at incredible speeds on carefully calculated trajectories. They weren't sophisticated, but they didn't need to be. At orbital velocities, even a small piece of debris could punch through the hull of a warship. "How did they manage this?" Kixmol muttered, watching his fleet carefully navigate through the maze of hazards. 3 months ago, they could barely reach their own moon. Deep beneath the Korean mountains, General Zhou studied satellite feeds of the alien fleet's cautious advance. The command bunker had been carved out of solid rock, its walls lined with electromagnetic shielding to prevent detection. Around him, dozens of officers coordinated resistance efforts across 6 continents, their screens showing the real-time positions of both human and alien forces. The general was a veteran of multiple conflicts, but nothing had prepared him for this kind of warfare. Fighting an enemy with superior technology meant abandoning everything the military had taught him about conventional tactics. Instead, his forces had scattered like seeds in the wind, forming small cells that could strike quickly and disappear before the aliens could respond. Colonel Eugeni's voice crackled through the encrypted communication system from her position outside Seoul. "Sir, the aliens are deploying ground forces around the capital. They're setting up some kind of perimeter, probably planning to use it as a staging area for the occupation." Zhou nodded, studying the tactical map. The aliens were following their standard playbook, just as human intelligence had predicted. Secure the major population centers first, establish control over the government, then expand outward. It was logical, efficient, and exactly what the resistance had been hoping for. "Let them set up their perimeter," he replied calmly. "The more forces they commit to one location, the fewer they have available everywhere else. Once they're dug in and feeling comfortable, we'll show them what human ingenuity really means." In underground laboratories around the world, teams of scientists and engineers worked around the clock on projects that would have been impossible just months earlier. The aliens had made a critical error when they destroyed that satellite. They had given humanity a perfect opportunity to study their technology in action, and humans had always been exceptionally good at reverse engineering things. Engineer Haiwan hadn't slept more than 4 hours in any single night since the invasion began. Her team had been analyzing fragments of alien technology recovered from the orbital debris field, and what they discovered was both encouraging and terrifying. The alien technology was incredibly advanced, but it wasn't magic. It followed understandable principles, used recognizable materials, and most importantly, had weaknesses that could be exploited. The power coupling on their energy weapons has a fatal flaw, she explained to a group of military commanders via encrypted video link. If you can overload it with the right frequency of electromagnetic pulse, the entire weapon system shuts down for approximately 47 seconds. What amazed the aliens most was how quickly humans adapted their discoveries into practical applications. Weapons that should have taken years to understand were being copied and improved within days. Human engineers took alien designs and made them simpler, more reliable, and easier to mass-produce using Earth's existing industrial base. The hegemony's first real shock came when they deployed their feared pacification gas over major population centers. The gas was designed to make populations docile and compliant, turning potential rebels into cooperative subjects. It had worked on every previous conquest, without fail. But when the purple cloud settled over New York, London, and Tokyo, nothing happened. People continued to evacuate in orderly fashion, following predetermined plans that seemed completely unaffected by the alien chemical weapon. Somehow, impossibly, the humans had developed countermeasures for a weapon they had never encountered before. The second shock came 6 hours later, when hegemony soldiers in the occupied cities began falling ill. The symptoms were unlike anything in their medical databases. It started with disorientation and fatigue, then progressed to complete system failure within hours. Entire platoons had to be evacuated to orbital medical facilities. Later analysis revealed that the humans had somehow developed biological agents specifically tailored to alien physiology. This should have been impossible for a species that had never encountered off-world life forms before, but the evidence was undeniable. The humans had studied the genetic material left behind by the aliens' initial reconnaissance probes and turned it into a weapon. Commander Kicksmall stared at the casualty reports in disbelief. In 3 days of occupation, he had lost more soldiers to human biological warfare than he had in the previous 5 planetary conquests combined. These weren't primitive savages fighting with sticks and stones. These were clever, adaptable, and utterly ruthless opponents who seemed to anticipate his every move. For the first time in his military career, Kicksmall began to wonder if the hegemony might have made a serious mistake in choosing to invade Earth. Captain, Jinwoo felt the familiar vibration of the stolen alien ship beneath his hands as they dropped out of hyperspace. The hegemony corvette had once belonged to a patrol squadron that made the mistake of getting too close to Earth's defensive grid. Now it served humanity, painted with crude Korean characters that spelled out its new name across the hull. The Tiu fridge was a strange mix of alien technology and human modifications. Original control panels hummed alongside jury-rigged human computers, their screens displaying information in 3 different languages. His crew was just as mixed. Former prisoners of war who had chosen to fight alongside their captors rather than rot in alien detention centers. Navigator Su-jin bent over her console, fingers dancing across controls she had learned to operate through trial and error. 6 months ago, she had been a commercial airline pilot flying passengers between Seoul and Tokyo. Now she was plotting jump coordinates through hostile alien space, calculating routes that would keep them alive long enough to complete their mission. Target acquired, she announced, her voice steady despite the danger they were flying into. Hegemony Supply Depot, orbiting the 4th moon of Kepler 438. Intelligence reports light defensive presence, mostly automated systems. Jinwoo studied the tactical display, noting the positions of patrol ships and defense platforms. The depot was exactly where their sources said it would be, protected by the kind of routine security that had been adequate for centuries of unchallenged hegemony dominance. That overconfidence was becoming their greatest weakness. Just like the intelligence said, he nodded to his crew, remember the drill, hit fast, grab what we can, and get out before their reinforcements arrive. We're not here to win a battle. We're here to make them bleed resources. The attack began with Sujin bringing them in on the depot's blind side, using the moon's gravity well to mask their approach. Their stolen ship's identification codes would only fool the automated systems for a few minutes, but that was all they needed. Engineer Han Sol worked frantically at his station, overriding security protocols and downloading supply manifests, while his teammates prepared boarding charges. The depot's AI systems recognized their ship as friendly, never suspecting that the corvette's crew had changed hands during a desperate battle 3 months earlier. "Docking bay secured," reported Sergeant Kyung Min over the comm system. His boarding team had taken control of the depot's loading area without firing a shot, the automated systems still believing they were legitimate hegemony personnel. What followed was organized chaos. Human raiders moved through the supply depot like a swarm of ants, grabbing everything of value they could carry. Energy weapons, medical supplies, communication equipment, and most importantly, intelligence data about hegemony fleet movements and supply schedules. The depot's few organic guards never had a chance to sound an alarm. They were overwhelmed. Before they understood what was happening, stunned and restrained rather than killed, dead guards would have meant investigations and pattern analysis. Confused guards filing contradictory reports would create exactly the kind of administrative chaos that slowed down enemy response times. 17 minutes after they arrived, Jinwoo's crew was back in hyperspace with their cargo holds full and their computers loaded with intelligence that would fuel a dozen more raids. By the time hegemony patrol ships reached the depot, they found confused guards telling impossible stories about human raiders who had appeared from nowhere and vanished like ghosts. This scene was playing out across dozens of star systems as human raiding parties struck at supply lines that had been secure for centuries. Each successful attack provided resources for the resistance and intelligence for future operations. More importantly, they forced the hegemony to divert massive resources to protecting assets they had never needed to defend before. Admiral Zhou stood in his command center, staring at a star map covered in red markers, indicating successful human raids. Each marker represented a failure of hegemony security, a crack in the empire that had seemed unshakable just months earlier. "How are they doing this?" he demanded of his intelligence chief, a nervous alien whose species had served the hegemony faithfully for over 400 years. "These humans appear everywhere at once, hit targets they shouldn't even know about, then disappear before we can respond." The intelligence officer shuffled through reports, each one more baffling than the last. "Sir, their attack patterns make no logical sense. They hit high-value targets and ignore easy ones. They strike deep in our territory, then attack border systems the next day. There's no predictable strategy we can counter." What the Admiral didn't understand was that unpredictability was exactly the strategy. Human raiders weren't following any military doctrine that hegemony tacticians could analyze and counter. They were improvising, adapting, and taking advantage of opportunities as they appeared. Lieutenant Bo Young sat in the communication center of a captured hegemony command ship, monitoring enemy transmissions with barely concealed amusement. The aliens were trying desperately to find patterns in human behavior, looking for the kind of rigid military structure they understood. "Listen to this," she told her colleague, translating an intercepted conversation between two hegemony commanders. "They think we're using some kind of precognitive ability to predict their movements. They can't believe we're just making it up as we go along." The truth was both simpler and more complex than the aliens imagined. Human raiders succeeded because they thought like humans, not like military machines. They took risks that no sensible commander would approve, made decisions based on intuition rather than doctrine, and changed plans on the fly when opportunities presented themselves. Each successful raid made the next one easier. Captured hegemony equipment was reverse-engineered and improved, creating better weapons and more reliable ships. Intelligence gathered during raids revealed new targets and vulnerabilities. Most importantly, former prisoners and defectors provided insider knowledge of hegemony procedures and weaknesses. The psychological impact was just as important as the material damage. Hegemony forces had never faced an enemy that struck without warning and vanished without trace. Their commanders were used to fighting conventional battles with predictable outcomes, not guerrilla warfare against opponents who seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once. Supply convoys that had traveled the same routes for decades now required military escorts. Depot commanders requested additional guards for facilities that had never been threatened. Patrol schedules were changed weekly to prevent human raiders from predicting their movements. But every defensive measure taken to counter human raids meant fewer resources available for offensive operations. The vast hegemony war machine was slowly being forced to turn inward, defending itself against an enemy that refused to fight fair or follow the rules of civilized warfare. Jin Wu's crew was already planning their next raid when they received new intelligence about a major supply convoy carrying advanced weapons to the front lines. The convoy would be heavily guarded, but the intelligence was too good to pass up. Soul's Vengeance jumped back into hyperspace, carrying its crew toward another impossible mission that somehow seemed perfectly reasonable to human minds. Dr. So-Young's boots touched alien soil for the first time in her life, but she felt no fear. The planet Kepler 442b stretched out before her under a pale orange sun, its purple vegetation swaying in the gentle breeze. This world had been under hegemony control for 8 centuries, its people ground down by generations of oppression, until they had almost forgotten what freedom meant. The transport ship behind her carried more than just passengers. In its cargo hold were weapons blueprints, tactical manuals, and communication equipment. Everything needed to turn desperate rebels into effective fighters. More importantly, it carried something the hegemony had never expected to spread across: their empire. Hope. The local resistance leader approached her cautiously, his reptilian features marked by old scars and a lifetime of fear. His species had evolved on this world millions of years ago, building a peaceful civilization that prized knowledge and art. Then the hegemony arrived and turned them into slaves in their own home. "Dr. So-Young," he asked through a translation device, his voice carrying decades of suppressed anger. "We received your message. You truly believe we can fight back against them?" She nodded, looking around at the gathered rebels who had risked everything just to attend this meeting. They were farmers, teachers, artists, ordinary people who had finally decided they'd had enough of living under alien rule. "The hegemony ruled us for 800 years, he continued, gesturing toward the massive orbital platforms that monitored everything happening on the planet's surface. You've shown it's possible to fight back, but we're not warriors. We don't know how to fight." So-Young smiled, remembering her own feelings of helplessness when the first hegemony ships appeared over Earth. "Everyone deserves freedom," she replied, her words automatically translated into the local language. "We'll show you how to take yours. The first thing you need to understand is that you don't have to be warriors to win. You just have to be smarter than they expect." Over the following weeks, she and her team worked tirelessly to share everything humanity had learned about fighting a technologically superior enemy. They taught the locals how to build improvised explosive devices from common industrial chemicals, how to hack into hegemony communication networks, and most importantly, how to think like guerrilla fighters instead of conventional soldiers. BCME. Transformation was remarkable. Within a month, hegemony patrols began reporting equipment failures and communication breakdowns. Supply convoys started disappearing without explanation. Orbital sensors detected nothing, but somehow the resistance was growing stronger every day. Similar scenes played out across dozens of star systems as human advisors spread throughout the galaxy. Each world presented unique challenges, different environments, different species, different levels of hegemony control, but the basic principles remained the same: hit fast, stay hidden, and make the enemy pay for every small victory. On Proxima. Centauri B, an aquatic species, learned to use their natural swimming abilities to plant explosives on underwater hegemony installations. The crystalline beings of Wolf 359 discovered they could use their natural ability to refract light to become nearly invisible to hegemony sensors. Each species found ways to turn their unique characteristics into weapons against their oppressors. Human. Innovations spread like wildfire across the galaxy. Improvised weapons built from farming equipment, communication networks hidden in children's toys, and tactics that turned entire populations into intelligence networks. Most importantly, the idea that the mighty hegemony could be defeated spread from world to world, carried by refugees, traders, and former prisoners. Emperor Gorthak sat on his crystalline throne at the heart of the hegemony capital, reading reports that grew more disturbing by the day. Rebellion had always existed in his empire, but it had been manageable, isolated uprisings that could be crushed before they spread. This was different. This was coordinated, systematic, and spreading faster than his forces could contain it. 17. More systems have declared independence this week, his military advisor reported, his voice trembling with barely concealed panic. The rebels are using human tactics and human weapons. Our standard suppression protocols aren't working. The Emperor's rage was a cold, calculating thing that had been building for months. Each failed military operation, each successful rebel attack, each world that slipped from his control added fuel to the fire burning in his chest. The humans had done more than resist his rule. They had infected his entire empire with the virus of rebellion. Enough, he snarled, rising from his throne with the fluid grace of a predator. The crystalline chamber around him pulsed with dangerous energy, responding to his emotional state. Mobilize the Imperial Guard. Recall every ship from the outer territories. We end this human infection at its source. The order sent shockwaves through the hegemony military hierarchy. The Imperial Guard had never been deployed in full force, not in the 1,000-year history of the Empire. These were the elite of the elite, equipped with the most advanced weapons and commanded by officers who had never known defeat. Half the hegemony fleet began converging on the Sol system from across the galaxy, creating the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history. Dreadnoughts the size of cities, carrier ships that could launch 1,000,000 fighters, and weapons platforms capable of cracking planets moved steadily toward Earth's solar system. Colonel Tae Young watched there. Approached from her position on Defense Platform 7, one of hundreds of fortified installations scattered throughout the Sol system. The massive screens around her showed the incoming hegemony fleet as red dots against the star field, each dot representing enough firepower to destroy a moon. Final count is in, reported her communications officer. 2,437 capital ships plus support vessels. They're not taking any chances this time. She nodded grimly, checking the status displays that showed the readiness of Earth's defenses. Every asteroid in the system had been hollowed out and filled with weapons. Every planet bristled with defensive installations that had been built and rebuilt a dozen times as human engineers found ways to make them more effective. The entire solar system had been turned into a fortress with overlapping fields of fire and defensive positions that could support each other, even if individual. Installations were destroyed. It was humanity's masterpiece of defensive engineering, built by 8 billion people who had worked together with a single purpose. They're coming to finish us, she reported to the War Council through the quantum communication network that linked every human installation in the system. Admiral Kyung-ho's voice crackled back through the speakers, calm and confident despite the impossible odds they faced. Let them come. We've been preparing for this moment since the day they first arrived. We'll show them the price of trying to cage humanity. The final battle for humanity's survival was about to begin. The Battle of Sol began at 0347 hours on a Tuesday morning, though time had lost most of its meaning for the defenders who had been preparing for this moment for over a year. The hegemony fleet dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation, their massive ships blotting out the stars like a plague of metal locusts descending on humanity's home system. Admiral Hyo Jin stood on the bridge of Earth's Defiance, watching the enemy fleet deploy across her tactical screens. The ship around her had been built in the orbital yards above Mars, constructed from salvaged alien technology and human ingenuity. It wasn't the largest vessel in the human fleet, but it was the most advanced, incorporating every lesson learned from months of desperate fighting. Contact, her sensor officer announced, Hegemony forces are moving into attack formation. Count is 2,437 capital ships, plus escorts. The numbers were staggering. The entire human fleet consisted of fewer than 300 ships, most of them converted civilian vessels or captured alien craft. By every measure of military logic, this should have been over before it started. But military logic had stopped applying the moment humanity decided to fight back. "All stations report readiness," Hyojin ordered, her voice carrying across the communication networks that linked every human position in the solar system. The responses came back from across the system: defense platforms hidden in asteroid, fields, weapon emplacements buried on airless moons, and fighter squadrons dispersed throughout the debris rings of Jupiter and Saturn. Each position had been carefully chosen and prepared, turning the entire solar system into an elaborate trap. Emperor Gorthak commanded his fleet from the bridge of the Imperial dreadnought Eternal Dominion, a ship so massive it had its own artificial gravity and weather systems. He had fought in dozens of campaigns across the galaxy, but never against an enemy that refused to follow the basic rules of warfare. "Begin the assault," he ordered, expecting to see the human fleet either flee or make a desperate charge toward his superior forces. Instead, something completely unexpected happened. The human ships scattered like startled fish, disappearing into asteroid fields and debris clouds that should have provided no real protection. "Sir, we're losing sensor contact with multiple enemy vessels," his tactical officer reported. "They're using some kind of stealth technology we haven't encountered before." The truth was simpler and more infuriating than advanced technology. The humans were hiding in plain sight, using the natural features of their solar system like a guerrilla, force-fighting in familiar territory. They knew every asteroid, every debris field, every gravitational anomaly that could mask a ship's signature. The first attacks came from everywhere at once. Human fighters erupted from hiding places that shouldn't have been able to conceal anything larger than a shuttle. They struck like wasps, hitting the larger hegemony ships with missiles and energy weapons, before vanishing back into the cosmic debris that filled the space between planets. "Damage reports coming in from all sectors," announced the communications officer aboard the Eternal Dominion. "Multiple hits on the third battle group. The cruiser Righteous Fury has been destroyed." Gorthak stared at his tactical display in disbelief. A cruiser capable of conquering entire worlds had been destroyed by fighters that his sensors could barely detect. This wasn't how battles were supposed to work. Larger ships with better weapons were supposed to win, not get picked apart by invisible opponents. Admiral Hyojin watched the battle unfold from her command center, orchestrating a symphony of destruction that had been planned down to the smallest detail. Every human position in the system was connected by quantum communication networks that allowed instantaneous coordination across impossible distances. "Enemy flagship is moving into position," her tactical officer reported, highlighting the massive Imperial dreadnought on the main display. Hyojin smiled coldly, remembering all the simulations and planning sessions that had led to this moment. "Good. That's exactly where we want him." The trap had been months in the making, requiring precise calculations of orbital mechanics and gravitational forces. As the Imperial fleet moved deeper into the solar system, pursuing what appeared to be a retreating human force, they were actually being herded into carefully prepared kill zones. On the sixth day of battle, Engineer Min-Su sat at his monitoring station on Defense Platform 12, watching as the final phase of humanity's plan began to unfold. The platform was hidden inside a hollowed-out asteroid, its weapons charged and ready for the moment they had all been waiting for. "All units initiate Operation Mousetrap," came the order across the communication network. What the hegemony fleet had mistaken for random asteroid debris suddenly revealed itself as an elaborate network of hidden weapons platforms, each one positioned to cover specific areas of space with overlapping fields of fire. The gravitational anomalies that had seemed like natural obstacles were actually artificially created zones where human engineers had been manipulating mass and energy for months. Half the Imperial fleet found itself caught in a carefully orchestrated massacre. Ships that had seemed safely positioned suddenly discovered they were surrounded by weapons they couldn't see and couldn't escape. The Emperor's meticulously planned assault dissolved into chaos as his forces tried to fight an enemy that seemed to be everywhere at once. The Eternal Dominion, pride of the Imperial Navy, found itself taking fire from 12 different directions simultaneously. Its shields, designed to withstand the weapons of conventional fleets, couldn't handle the concentrated barrage from hidden human positions. "Target destroyed," Minsu reported quietly as he watched the massive dreadnought break apart under the sustained assault. The ship that had conquered 100 worlds died in the cold vacuum of space, its reactor core painting the darkness with brilliant light as it exploded. When the surviving hegemony forces finally managed to retreat from the Sol system, they carried with them news that would shake the foundation of the galaxy. The mighty Imperial fleet had been shattered by a species that had barely mastered interplanetary travel just 2 years earlier. But the real victory wasn't in space. While the Battle of Sol raged, rebellions across the galaxy had used the distraction to launch coordinated uprisings. World after world declared independence, using the tactics and weapons that human advisors had taught them. The 1,000-year hegemony empire collapsed in a matter of weeks. President Jiwon stood in the same Sol bunker where humanity had first decided to resist, but now she addressed representatives from over 100 liberated worlds. The room was filled with beings of every imaginable shape and size, all united by their shared experience of throwing off the chains of oppression. "We didn't fight for conquest," she declared, her words translated into dozens of languages and broadcast across the galaxy. "We fought so that everyone could be free. That's the only victory worth having." The newly formed Galactic Confederation was built on principles that the old hegemony had never understood. Instead of ruling through fear and force, it operated through cooperation and mutual respect. Each world maintained its independence while contributing to the common defense against any future threats. The galaxy had learned an important lesson. Humans didn't just want freedom for themselves. They were willing to teach everyone else how to fight for it too.